and right. And read my, does everyone hear that recording in progress?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. That's a new thing. Okay, so I'll read my clapboard, which says, The Sophist, Answering Parmenides, Winter 2021, Session 3, Killing His Father. Okay, so folks, I'm going to, this whole thing about being and non-being, it's kind of hard for us to come at. I'm going to have a little bit of a play around it to start with, and let me know if it helps. So I'm going to share the screen now. Okay, hopefully you can see my slides there. If you can't, give me a yell. All right. Now, I asked a few people before the class started if they know the nursery rhyme where you learn to count backwards, 10 green bottles sitting on the wall. Okay, so here's the BBC's little version of it. Here we've got 10 green bottles sitting on the wall. And then now we've only got 9 green bottles sitting on the wall. And the nursery rhyme keeps going down and down and down until you've got 1 green bottle sitting on the wall. And if this green bottle should accidentally fall, then you have no green bottle sitting on the wall. So you've got no green bottle sitting on the wall. So it's kind of an interesting way to describe this scene here when you see the wall here and what's there, there's no green bottles. But what else is not on the wall? Is there anything else that's not on the wall? So there's no green bottles, and we can represent that by a picture with a cross through it. So not bottles, but there's also no birds sitting on the wall, is there? So there's no bottles sitting on the wall, there's no birds sitting on the wall. There's also no pink elephant sitting on the wall. Can't see any pink elephants there. And Humpty Dumpty, well, if he was sitting on the wall, he's not sitting on the wall anymore. So there's no bottles, no birds, no elephants, no Humpty Dumpty, no Chinaman. The number of things that we can say are not on the wall is inexhaustible. You could think of any number of things that are not sitting on the wall. And we could make a generalization about this. And we could just say thing crossed out, meaning no thing, anything at all, no birds, no plates, no cups, nothing is sitting on the wall. Okay, so why did we say no bottles were sitting on the wall before? And why would we bring up all these things in negation? Okay, so that's the first thing to think about. Now, the second thing I thought might be helpful is to think about it in terms of the way we count. So no thing, right, we can think of as equaling 0. There's nothing there, so there's 0 bottles on the wall, but there's also 0 things on the wall. Now, in ancient calculators all across the civilized world, going back as far as we know, and possibly back into Neolithic times, all these civilizations counted using counting boards or abacuses, where they had pebbles. That's where calculus comes from. The word calculus comes from. Had pebbles or beads on rails in abacuses, or sticks. The Chinese originally had little sticks that they used in their counting, and they used a place value system. So depending on what column it was in, depended how much each bead or stick was worth, just like we have with units, tens, hundreds, and so on. And actually the decimal system was quite common, as it was used in China, probably because we've got 10 fingers, right? So if you see here, you can see you've got the 2 sticks in the first column, and then you've got this symbol which is for 6 sticks, and then you've got an empty one, and then you've just got 1 there. And that translates to 1062. But notice in the hundreds column how there's nothing in the space. Okay, so there's nothing there. Whereas when we use the notation, we put a 0. Okay, so I'll just kind of formalize this for us. And I can't see the rest of this column because people are across it. So I hope you can adjust your screen so you can see the right-hand column which says total. I can now. Okay, so this is just a formalizing of all these different systems. So what I've got is the ones column here, the tens column here, and the hundreds column here, right? And so we've got 100, 2 tens, and 3 ones. Can someone please turn off their mute and tell me what number that is?
123.
Okay, thank you. Cool, good effort. 123. So this one here has got 2 in the hundreds, 3 in the tens, and 1 in the ones. So that's 233. Now, consider this one here. We've got in our system, in our place value notational system, it's 101. Okay, so think about what that would be in their place value counting board system. So what you get is a 1 in the hundreds, nothing in the tens, and 1 in the units column. And what would you get when it is just 100? Well, you actually get 2 columns with nothing in it. So before they used notation, before paper got cheap and people started using notation, there wasn't any need for a 0. Okay, so the 0 needed to tell you, oh, there's a column here, so I put the 0 there so you know there's a column there. So when you do notational counting, you needed that. This transition is interesting for us. So in the old system, an absence is indicated by an absence. Whereas in our notational system, we've got cheap paper and we do all our calculations on paper. In our place value notational system, an absence is represented by a mark, in this case, a 0. So 0 represents nothing in the column. The none, the nothing is marked. So what I want you to do is to relate this to the notion of saying no thing, nothing, saying none or reduce it to, not one or reduce it to none, or saying not being. In our notational system, we have the 0, which says what is not there. That creates an interesting problem and confusion as we go along. Okay, so, all right. So this next page is intentionally left blank. So this page here is intentionally left blank. I've marked it. It's a funny thing. Have people seen that on documents? This page is intentionally left blank. Is it blank?
Oh, I just get it. That's funny.
Has anyone seen that before in a document? You see it in standards, in official documents where there might be confusion. Okay, little exercise. Just an exercise for 10 seconds. I want everyone to close their eyes for 10 seconds, and you can think about anything or imagine anything, but not think or imagine a pink elephant. Okay, you ready? No pink elephants. Okay, how'd you go? All right, so now a little technical term here. Cipher, it's actually an old term, but I think it's a useful one because we just say zero and that's where zero comes from. But a cipher used to mean, in a narrow sense, a place marker for not or none. So our zero does that. As we said, the notational zero does that. By the way, a lot of people make a big fuss about when the notational zero first appeared. The notational zero only appears in that transition to paper. So if you keep counting on the counting board and then write down your result and calculating on the counting board and write down your results after that, you can use Roman numerals or whatever, and you don't need a zero. You only need the zero when you do your calculations on paper. And this is a big myth in the West. Who invented the zero first? Well, the people who started calculating on paper. It's a simple thing to do. The place value system is the big invention, and that just goes back as far as anyone knows. So we've got the cipher, the zero in our case, as in the circle, right? Sort of defining that space that's empty means zero is a cipher. A cipher stands for not something. It's a zero for the not tens in the sorry, oh, what have I got there? In 101, it's the zero is there saying not a 10. This zero is marking saying there's nothing here. Just like the sophist, right? The zero is saying what is not. The zero is saying what is not, just like the sophist. What's going on here? Saying what is not. This symbol here, we've already taught ourselves, says no pink elephants here. This one here says no bottles here. And this one here, interesting, you know, no skateboarding here. Oh, wow, I didn't think I could skateboard here. What a great idea. Association between the negation and the affirmation. Okay, now let's consider, what about absolutely nothing? Non-being, void. What can we say or think about that? Everything, every idea, every form that we can speak of in our logos, that we can speak of in our discourse, is either something or its negation. Everything we can refer to is either same, or other. Now we know this is familiar to us. Everything we can refer to is either something or its negation, some concept or its negation, some form or its negation, something that in some sense is, or a negation of that. Empty space is other to its container, and other to what is in it. Think about that. Empty space is other to its container, or what is in it. If there is absolute nothing, a none that is not relative to anything at all, this cannot be referred to. Think about that. If there is an absolute nothing, it cannot be referred to. As soon as you refer to something, it, if you like, becomes or is something. Now, this is where Parmenides is making a good point. And he's pointing to a confusion that comes up again and again in our thinking that people don't realize. And Plato will exploit this in the next few weeks in our reading. However, says Plato, this does not mean that we can't speak of relative knots, including relative non-being of things. But these nots must be acknowledged as relative, as other to whatever it is. E.g., nothing is relative to the form of thingness, as not anything. So every none, nothing, void, non-being that we can speak of is relative to its the opposite, to its affirmation. So now let's compare these, compare the cipher with Plato's other, which is something we're all familiar with. So we have the opposites, the opposites that are one. We have justice, which is the opposite of not. Sorry, justice, which is not injustice. Island, which is not sea. So injustice is the other side of justice, and sea is the other side of island. So these are analogies or examples of this fundamental form. So not pink elephants is the other side of pink elephants. Not bottle is the other side of bottle. So what is not on the wall? No bottles, no birds, no pink elephants, no Humpty Dumpty, no things. The negation is the other side of the affirmation. Now, let's go back to our familiar making a distinction, our distinction. We have island and sea, we have same and other, we have justice, injustice, and we can see how this works with the other things we've been dealing with here, with bottle, not bottle, pink elephant, not pink elephant, all in the form of one, not one, or none. Being, not being. So this is what we're working with now in the rest of the Sophist. We're working with this absolute nothing, which can't be said. We can't speak of it, and we can't even negate it. On that basis, we must be silent. And we should compare this to the in the Republic, the ineffable source, the one that's beyond being and knowing, and that we then go and see in the Neoplatonists in their mysticism, the rising up to the non-being, which is the same, then becomes the same as the absolute nothing. The absolute nothing is the absolute everything, but we're not getting that to that today. We're getting into relative nothing and void or non-being and absolute. That's what we're dealing with. So the absolute can't be said. There is no logos. There's no name for the absolute. Already a contradiction. Okay, so I'm going to stop the sharing there and call for any questions or comments or reflections. I am very interested to see if that helped people at all.
I was a little bit amused by the statement on the blank page that said this page has intentionally been left blank. It was, so there were two things that went through my head. The first thing was that I was thinking, well, actually it's not blank. And then the second thing was, you actually have to tell me that there's no thing on it. And I thought that was, I don't know what I thought about that, but I think it was the first time I actually kind of went, that's right. Okay, so someone is telling me there's nothing on this page. I don't know. I can't put my finger on what it was that I found weird about that. Like, why do you need to tell me that there's nothing there? But yeah, I don't know. I just thought I'd bring that up.
Well, Jackie, there is a reason to tell you, and it's to do especially with the early days of photocopying, when people would put things through a photocopier and then a page would go blank, and then they would be turning the page of the Australian Standard or whatever it was, and there's a new chapter or whatever, and there's a page that's left blank, and they think, oh my God, I've missed something here. And, you know, like there's legal implications for these sorts of things. So that's why they do it. But the meditation on it is very healthy. And, you know, you've already stated some of it. This page is blank. No, it's not. It's got the mark on it. You know, and how does that relate to the naming of nothing? You know, the zero doing the naming. For millennia, you know, in our calculations, you know, in the history, it's a very short history that we use the zero. For millennia in our calculations, there was no marking of the nothing.
Yeah, I didn't know that until you showed it with the Roman numerals as well.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that. And that sounds like Donald Trump. And that, no, it is this really interesting thing that there's this whole history of, who invented the zero? Oh, wow. You know, I mean, it's like no one knew that there was nothing before, or absence before they invented the zero. You know, it's just ridiculous. These counting boards go back as far as you can. It's who invented place value, and no one knows who invented place value because place value goes back so far. But what we need to see from it is this thing about marking what is not. Talking about or naming non-being, this is the thing that they're dealing with, and it kind of looks a bit weird for us. The way the debate is termed here and elsewhere, it seems a bit silly, but there's something underneath it that is very important, and I think you can start to see that's related to this work we've already done in terms of the other in the same. And we'll come right back to this later on in our reading.
Even though you say the zero wasn't invented or wasn't, let's say, necessary when the tablet was there, the tablet still had a region where something could go. So there was a defined space where if there was something, it would exist. So you know that there was nothing there. Whereas when you moved to numbers and it moved outside a tablet or an ordered space where there were slots, then the zero became necessary because you didn't have a reference point to say there should be something there, or maybe there isn't something there.
Exactly.
You're just writing a string.
Exactly. That's exactly it. Yeah. So it was because you didn't any longer have the spaces defined, you had to mark the absence. And this is marking the absence, and this marking the absence is the same form of marking of what Plato's talking about here and Parmenides is talking about here. It's saying what is not. You're saying there is nothing here. There's no tens in this number. There's no units in this number. There's nothing here. Mark it, right? So there's other systems where you don't have to make a special mark for what is absent. You don't have to have a presence naming an absence. And this is what we're pointing at. In the same way as you say, this page is intentionally left blank. It's not blank anymore.
So then we kind of need a designation to designate the nothingness. Are you getting it?
Well, do we? Why do we?
In written form, I think. Oh, I don't know. Are we talking about, I don't know.
You see, you've got to think about it in terms of the way we're talking about, you know, the island and the sea stuff, the other in the same. You know, the not is relative to the affirmation. The background's relative to the foreground, you know.
The not is relative to the being of it.
So in terms of being, the being is, not being is relative to the being, however being is defined.
Okay.
Can you close your, you know, like, it's good to meditate on all of these things. You know, just reading the words and hearing the words doesn't help. You know, sometimes close your eyes and imagine outer space with planets in it. And then imagine space with no planets in it. And really just think, how would you define space if there was nothing in it? You know, the nothingness is inconceivable to us, let alone, you know, nothingness is inconceivable to us except in a relative way. And so not and none in this way of thinking, in Plato's way of thinking, are the same formally, because none is relative, not one and not one. Okay. Nothing is relative. Think of the word no thing. None is a contraction of not one. It's relative to thing. It's relative to one.
If I'm in a shop and I'm buying 99 items and I decide I need an extra one, and the calculus puts down 100, I'm aware that I haven't got one and nothing. I'm aware that I've got 99 plus one. So that in that sense, the two empty spaces do mean something.
Oh, okay.
I have 100 goods in my hand that I bought.
The empty space does
Zeros
mean
define what's next to them.
Sorry, Hume?
The zeros define the numbers adjacent to them. You have 1 and 1, that's 11, but you put a 0 in the middle of it, that 0 defines the hundreds, so you've got one of them, and that makes the number 101. So not only does the 0 define that there's nothing in that space, but it actually gives definition to the numbers on either side of it.
Because it tells you where the columns are, right? It tells you where the hundreds column is, and that's right. So, Alexandra, it's not that it's not that you don't know. We're not talking about you don't know, because all you do is, you know, if you imagine you're collecting your sticks and you get to nine sticks in this column, and then you go to 10, you throw all those sticks away and just put 1 in the next column. And then when you get 9, and then you throw them away and put 1, it's all very clear. It's very clear. The confusion comes in philosophically when you mark an absence with an absence. I'm trying to get us to, because we can picture this quite clearly, I think, and relate this to what's being talked about in the Sophist.
Yes. No, I understand your reasoning. I just think there is something there.
Sorry, there is.
Well, there is something there. That's, I mean, the meaning of it. If I've got 9 goods and I get 1 extra, I know that I may have one empty space, but that empty space doesn't mean anything to me, the purchaser, because I've purchased 9 plus 1 goods, therefore I've got 10.
So what it means
the
is
empty
that
space has a meaning to me, the purchaser.
Absolutely has a meaning. It absolutely has a meaning. But what it says is that now that you're purchasing 10 items, you're purchasing 10 items, not 11 or 12 or 13, not 10 plus 1 or 10 plus 2 or 10 plus 3 or 10 plus 4. You're purchasing 10 because we're using we could use a different system. We could use the 12-based system, right? You know, you just think of the old imperial measurements and, you know, like how many stones and ounces you are and things like that. Or you could use binary system, where you just get 1, and then when you go to 2, you put a 0 in that column and then put a 1 in the next one. There's only so you can count in different ways. You're not saying that that because you've moved from 9 to 10 that something profound has happened in terms of the objects that you've bought. Nothing profound's happened there. It's just your system of counting.
Yeah.
System of counting says, right, I've got 9, I'm going to 10, so I can throw all those away and just put a single 1 over here, and that tells me 10.
Yeah.
So,
but Benny, didn't we in the writing form get rid of the columns? So without the columns, we needed something else to replace the columns. Otherwise, you'd have a 1. You wouldn't know if it was 110 or 1. So you could either put like columns and then put the number and then get rid of 0, but that's a little more complicated. So we just simplified it. That's my first point. It just substitutes for the columns rather than anything. And my other point was, I'm as confused as last week with this whole number thing. When we talk about justice and injustice and island and sea, they're very simply understood opposites or contrasts. Whereas with numbers, it's a not very simply understood contrast, because 1 is different to 2, 1 is different to 3, 1 is different to 5, and there's a lot of differences there, infinite amount of differences. So it's not just justice and injustice or island and sea. It's 1 and 1,256,000, I don't know. Anything is different to 1. The multiplicity rather than, so what would be, like, you'd have justice or injustice. You can't have anything else, can you? It's either one or the other.
yeah,
I mean,
and the same with everything that you designate, or every idea that you designate. I mean, tell me one thing you refer to that you can't say is it and not something else, not its opposite.
But with for example, if I was going to say like 8 bottles, 9 bottles are different. They're not opposites. It's different, and I'm signifying the different. I'm showing contrast.
Okay, in that case, you've got 9 distinctions of bottles, and you have an identity, and you've repeated it 9 times, but you have the identity of the bottle. You start with that. So you might be counting pebbles. You start with the identity of the pebble. Now, in terms of simplifying it, it's interesting. I haven't made it clear what the point is here, and thank you for the questions. I think Hume kind of answered I hope Hume answered your question, Effie, or as he was trying to say anyway, that I'm not saying that the old system was a better system than the new system. The new system, when you've got paper, is a really good system for doing addition. Remember, you used to do addition and subtraction and everything. When you've got the columns and multiplication and long division, it works really well with all the columns, as does an abacus. So that's fine. Let's not dispute about that. What I'm saying is that this really interesting philosophical thing, right, where you're marking an absence in a number that is round in the tens, in the decimal system, right? It'd be different in the 12s. You have to count to 12 before you put the 0 in the first column, right? Or an absence in the first column. In the 10-based system, you have to wait till you get to 10. In an 8-based system, you have to wait. You do 7 and then you go over. In a binary system, you just do 1 and then you go over to the next column. Okay, so it's just a way of counting. But what's interesting philosophically, okay, is that in this system of counting, when we go to the notation, we're marking an absence. We're saying nothing is here in this column. There's no value here in this column, no value, because expressing it in the decimal system, when we express 10, there's nothing in the units column. when we're expressing 12 in the duo, I can't remember what it's called, in the 12 base system, it would be nothing in the units column when you get to 12. But when you get to 11, you'd have a character for 11, and that would be in the units column. Does that make sense? So it's all about making a mark, a logos, a name in your naming system, making a name for an absence, naming the absence. Yeah. You're on mute, Fula.
Sorry, can I think aloud for a minute?
Yeah, it'd be great.
Isn't even an empty space something? It's space. So those empty columns before the 0 was used actually scream out something. That there's an absence.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. So
to me, it's not nothingness, it's something.
Well, what I'm saying is that in the place value system, in the old system, where you had the columns or the beads on the wires on the abacus, absence was named by absence or marked by absence, right? In the notational system, absence is marked by a mark, is indicated by a mark. So that's the essential difference. So if there's something there, you put a character, you put a 1, or you put, one piece of stick or one pebble or 2 pebbles or 3 pebbles or 4 pebbles in the units area, or 4 beads or whatever. And when there's nothing in that units area, you don't have anything there at all. So
but you have the concept of space.
But how do you define this? Well, what I would say about space, again, yeah, I get what you're saying, and that's right, exactly right. You have the space, you have the absence. That's right. So, and that's important.
So I'm saying there is no nothingness.
Right. Well, I think we're agreeing. Okay. Anyone else before we go on?
Yeah, I'd like to just say that the Romans were hopeless mathematicians, because how could you multiply XXXVII by CXXXIV?
Well, this is a classic case, Akula, of this myth, right? The Romans used abacus and counting boards. Think of the counter in the shop, right? Why is it called the counter? Because that's where the counters used to be. The counters used to be on the counter. The Romans did not calculate with their Roman numeral system. They didn't calculate. All ancients didn't calculate with their number system. They calculated, they did their calculation, their adding, subtraction, multiplying, everything on their abacus, and then wrote down, sometimes in words, actually in words or in characters or in Roman numerals, what they were doing. And the Romans were not bad calculators. That's not fair. They built the aqueducts and everything. They needed to be good mathematicians, and they were. That's very insulting. I'm glad I'm not a Roman. Okay. Do you understand what I'm saying there? That's the point. Cooler.
Yeah, I get it.
See, a lot of there's a funny thing. I actually taught myself many years ago how to use an abacus, because there are people claim and still claim that you can do multiplication, division, and addition faster on an abacus, people who are good at it, than you can do it on paper. Still today, even if you've got a nice pen, everything.
And some people can calculate faster on an abacus than on a calculator.
Well, there you go. Yeah. So So yeah, they've got a bad name. Anyway, but this is not to say that's not our point here. Our point here, yeah, and that is a distraction. Our point here is naming the absence, naming the not, right? Because that's philosophically an issue. All right, we
used to
might
be a bookmaker's clerk. You had to do it in your head.
say it again.
I used to be a bookmaker's clerk who got me through university. You had to do the sums in your head.
In your head, yeah. Okay, well,
You'd be laughed off the course if you took out a pen.
right, okay. There you go. All right. Now, another thing people have been asking me about is, you know, is about, you know, what are forms and what's a form and so on like this, and how does it relate to what we're doing at the moment? So I'm just going to give a little bit of time to that now. So I'm going to share the screen again. Okay, so I just want to start with something that happened on Wednesday night. So we're doing Platonic Love in face-to-face on Wednesday nights. And on last Wednesday, people who might have done it, there's the symposium speech by Diotima, where Diotima, this kind of goddess-like figure, tells young Socrates everything she wants to know about love. He knows about love. And anyway, Achilles and Kathy presented it, and it was lovely. But Achilles started off with a song from John Lennon, and he said, oh, the lyrics are quite interesting and quite Platonic. And I thought, oh, why, what? Anyway, John Lennon says in All You Need Is Love, there's nothing you can know that isn't known. Nothing you can see that isn't shown. Now, there's definitely a Platonic interpretation of this. And it goes back to, and this is again something to meditate on, to really think about, what can I experience that is not my experience? What can I know that is not what I know? And this again relates to this negation thing, because in materialism, you say, I experience the object, the sensual object, my cup, directly, right? But what I know, the thing itself, is unknown. And there's a mistake there, because what I can experience is only my experience. What I can know is only what I know. There's nothing you can know that isn't known. Nothing you can see that isn't shown, as John Lennon would say. Okay. Now,
it reminds me of, I think it was Spinoza who said that we are all the sum up of our own individual experiences, because you can't be anything more than that, can you?
yes. And so it presents the problem that we just come back to again and again, but there seem to be something beyond my experience. It seems to be the independent objects in my world. And so materialism makes a leap and says, I know what I don't know. I know the object itself. Okay, so it's a thing you need to meditate on if you want to progress with this stuff. But let's move on from that, and let's consider, okay, so what are we talking about when we're talking about Plato not going to the material object, the external material object like that, and founding things there, not founding things in language, founding things in forms, founding things in the formal nature of reality. So what's he talking about here? So there's various levels and ways to talk about this. The first level is where people who are outside Platonism tend to think that forms is all about the particular thing and their form. So this cup expresses the form of cup, okay? This room expresses the form of a room, okay? And we can just go on and list any objects anywhere in our sensible, in our sensual world. Okay, so that's at a very basic level. Okay, So in your experience, you have objects and they express their formal nature, or they partake in their formal nature, as Plato would say. Now then you get, so we've seen that, and then we've also seen abstract concepts. So, but they're particular forms. So they're particular. So we have the form of justice, and we've moved on to defining the sophist. So we've got the form of the sophist. So they're concepts, right? We have the concept of, we think of them as concept of justice, the concept of beauty, the concept of the sophist. Okay, and so we can think of lots of others like that. Okay, now then we get non-particular or general forms. Now think about this, and I mean, maybe these boundaries are a bit, I'm just using this for educational purpose, for teaching purpose, right? Okay, so then we get non-particular forms, right? They seem to be very general and very applicable in so many different environments. So we can say greater or lesser, inside or outside, open or closed. And we can think of lots of others like that. Okay, now the final one, and we won't talk too much about this today, but we will in the next few weeks, is elementary forms. Okay, so these will come up later in this dialogue where we've got same and other. Well, we're familiar with that. It's like the distinction, the name, everything has this form, same and other. Bottle, not bottle, might have 10 bottles, not bottles, but we still, each one is distinguished. Or we have a group of bottles, a collection in a bag of bottles, and not in the bag of bottles, inside, outside, that sort of thing. Same and other, being, not being, changing, unchanging. Is it something that stays the same, or is it something that's dynamic? Okay, so now for those people who've done the Republic, those people who haven't, that's okay. Basically, in the divided line from my left to right, we have levels of reality. And so for Plato, it's the opposite. Pointing up, not pointing down, to what we normally think from materialism. So sensible things are over to the left, and the higher being, the higher reality is over to the right. And the higher reality is these more elementary forms. Okay, so in the Republic, talks about the higher logos, which talks about these forms, that analyzes these forms, the higher dialectic, I should say, the higher dialectic. And we're getting into the higher dialectic right now in doing our definitions. Okay, so in the higher dialectic, he says, here logos in these right-hand columns in the divided line, he says, here logos grasped by power of dialectic, using hypothesis to go as far as the unhypothetical principle of everything. So it's a principle beyond statement, right? Using no sense perceptions, but forms themselves, going from forms to forms and ending up with forms. So we remember that geometry was really important over here in the middle, because geometry bridged to the forms. But now when you're moving into Parmenides and the Sophist, he's dealing just with forms. So notice, it's nothing in particular. We do talk about particular forms, but we're moving away from particular things. We're moving towards particular forms, and then we're moving beyond particular forms to these very elementary things. And people might say, like compare it with logic, but it's not logic, it's forms, because logic is just a particular formal structure related to language. But he's got this relationship between the forms, the formal nature of reality, and the language, which we'll talk about at the moment a bit later. So the reality descends down from my right to left. Okay, so it's going that way whereas materialism would say it builds up from the particular object. Here it goes from the general to the particular. This is the orientation of Plato. This is the formalism of Plato. You look at sensible things and you're looking for their formal nature, the way they're structured in that way. So that's the approach, that's the formal approach in Plato. And I think that's probably the end of that. So I guess this is an opportunity to, let me get rid of that. And I've got rid of the share screen. Yeah. Okay. So maybe this is just an opportunity now just to talk about that, because at last week's class, there were quite a few questions after we closed the session. But is that giving us a bit of a picture now of what we're getting into with this dialectic, which is defining the sophist and dealing with these abstract concepts as we're moving into being and not being. How's it going, Alexandra? Do you sort of getting the Plato's approach here? Is that helping at all? Are you still on mute?
I feel okay with the forms. I feel I understand that, yes.
Okay, okay.
I'm always fascinated with your additional examples and things.
Oh, good. So they help, do they? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And what about you, Helen? How are you finding it? Just can you give me a bit of feedback or something? What's going awry?
Hi. Yeah, I think it's making a lot more sense too. I agree with Alexandra. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Understanding the forms and then sort of branching out from there. Yeah. I wonder, as a society, because they had that structure, or with the school, whether it made sort of more sense for them that didn't have a lot of space to move away from that type of thinking. What am I going to say?
I think I see what you're saying. I think, especially when we've got our screens that we're looking at, and we've got all the representation in our world, we're kind of moving further and further away from these fundamental forms, I suppose. But you've also got to remember that Plato was a real outlier. I mean, he was putting a particular view that that was as incredulous to his contemporaries as perhaps it is to us. Incredible to his contemporaries as it is to us. Mm-hmm. All right, look, I might move on because, oh, sorry, anyone else? Okay, I'll continue, and we're moving now into the sophist, bringing this form stuff into the sophist now. And so I hope this one helps as well. So let me do this, and let me know if you can't see the screen. Okay. So I just thought it might be a good idea to, Alexander, thank you for that, because that gives me more confidence that this might work. So defining the sophist, right? He's defining the sophist, and they're discussing, right, the sophist. What exactly is the sophist? What sort of an art is it? And comparing with other arts and going through and doing the dialectic and making the definition. Of course, they make 6 of them, so it's not really working. But anyway, so they do that. Now, I just thought you might compare it to if someone asked me where I am, someone says, oh, Bernie, it's good to speak to you. Where are you? Where are you? Well, in what sense are they asking where I am? So one thing might be that it's someone in London who wants to send me a book in the post. So the appropriate answer to that is to give my postal address, right? So I make the first distinction, Australia. I make the second distinction, Victoria. I make the third distinction, the suburb and the postcode, okay? And then my street, and then the number of my house. Okay, so I've defined in this way where I am relevant to post, right? Posting something to me, okay? And I can make a logos, right? I can give an account of this. So there's the form of where I am, right? I'm in my house here now, which is in this street, which is in Brunswick, which is in Victoria, which is in Australia. That is the form of where I am now, as defined in my world, as constructed by me and helped by everyone else, in accord with everyone else, I hope. Now I just lost that. Okay, so I make a logos, I give an account of this, and I say, I live in 831, this is not actually where I live. I live in 831 Berkeley Street, so I'm lying. I'm a sophist. I live in 831 Berkeley Street, Brunswick, Victoria, Australia. Okay? Okay, but can I, if someone asks me where I am, right, is there another valid answer to that? What if it was someone from the electoral office, or it was someone asking me politically where I am? Maybe they want me to vote for their party or whatever. So where I am in the electoral office, I'm in Australia, I'm in Victoria, not in Brunswick, because they amalgamated the councils, right? I vote for the council, I'm in the council area of Moreland. Okay, my libraries are there, my rubbish gets picked up by them and so on. So politically, where I am is different than if you asked where I was in the post, relevant to postal service. Okay. Now, are there any other ways that I could define where I was? Well, there's the old landline, right? I'm in Australia, +61. I'm in Victoria and Tasmania. It's category Victoria and Tasmania. So anything else? Any other way that I might define where I am? Can anyone else give me another way? That would be relevant to
psychiatrist office.
Sorry, what was that, Dave? What was that, David?
If you're at the psychiatrist and they say, where are you at?
And what would your answer be?
Doing fine. But I wouldn't tell them the address.
Right, okay. Okay. What about a location? You know, what about a relevant location? Can anyone think of a location that someone might need my location?
Yeah, if you're meeting up with someone for a coffee, where are you right now, Bernie? Can I come to you? Can we go to a coffee shop?
And would that be an address?
Not necessarily. I'm at Elwood Beach.
Oh, right, okay. Okay, yeah. All right, so how would you define that location? Would that be that would be like a geographic location, wouldn't it? A beach.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Come on.
Give latitude and longitude.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, that's another one. So if you're, say if you're in a boat or whatever, that's still really helpful, and it's actually used on our phones and everything. The lat long is used as the basis for that system. So another one is in the census, you have all your different census districts and everything, and that's different from all these others.
Where are you? I'm at work.
On a network. So there's lat long, there's a network. So there's various network things, like I want to send you this document in the post. Oh, but I can send you a PDF by email, right? Where are you by email? And that has a structure too, doesn't it? It has the AU on the end, something has the EDU, and it has all that. So it has a bit of a structure a bit like what we're talking about here. And you also have an IP address. It's still used for, well, certainly people who download illegal things know about IP address, right? It locates your actual computer in the system. Okay, and they do have a hierarchy as well, similar to this. So there are these various ways, and they're all
like, you know, walk straight for 500 meters, turn left for 200, turn right, turn left.
Well, yeah, well, that's direction. In some ways that could be. Some ways that could be. Yeah.
What about time, depending on which country you're in?
Location in time.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true. Yes, you would give your local time. That's true. Yep. Yep. Anything else? Okay, so can we see how there's this different form, let's call it a formal structure. So we're thinking the sophist, right? And the different definitions of sophist. You can see how there's a different formal structure for, you know, that's relevant to different circumstances, whether it's a census, whether it's political, whether it's sending something in the post, or whether it's sending something by email, right? Okay, so there's these different things. Now, in a way, they're all true, right? But how can, so there's this true false thing. So you've got the logos, like the address. Think about the logos of the address. Okay, where's that coming up? Okay, so you've got, I give an account of my address, it's put on the envelope, and hopefully the parcel arrives. Okay, so how can this be false? False to the form. So we've got logos and true to the form, using different names, name for the country, name for the state, name for everything else. You got the logos connected to the form in terms of names. Now, how can it be wrong? Well, this person overseas could mishear and think I'm in Austria, not Australia. So you could just get one of the categories wrong. You could mix up the categories, and that would be false. I live in Australia. Sorry, I live in Berkeley Street in the suburb of Victoria, in the state of Brunswick, right? You can get it wrong in that way. Okay, so that's false, right? So this is this true and false. There's a correspondence between the logos and the form, and it can be true and it can be false. For example, here, I could also use the wrong category at the level of Brunswick, where I say Moreland, right? That's my political address. So that's false in terms of postal. It's true in some terms of politics. So this is where we're getting the true and false we're getting the correspondence that we can actually say is true and false. And it relates to this stuff we were saying in Theaetetus about myth, right? So we can say that Santa Claus comes at Christmas is true to the form of the myth, right? Easter Bunny comes at Christmas is false to that form. Okay, so you use the logos, you use names, and you relate them to the form. Okay, so this is what we were doing with the angler, and this is what we were doing with the sophist. And so when you're defining something, you just go down one side because you're just trying to find the category Australia, Victoria, Brunswick that you are in. And the same way we did that with the angler. But then we also, when we got onto the sophist, we were looking at all these, we kept going back to the arts, right? Because they did 6 definitions and kept finding new definitions in different categories. Okay, so when you are doing the formal structure, you can put a distinction wherever you like. Okay, so there's and the sophist could be defined as being over here, and in some ways that makes sense. Okay, so I'll go back again to this relationship between logos and form. Some of you might have done lab reports when you were at school or maybe at university, where you write up a description of what you found. You'll have a chart or something else and the data, and you'll write up a description of the data. I think maybe that's a good thing to think about in terms of the relationship between language, right, which has all its rules and its grammar and everything, and the form. Okay, so we've got the nouns called front, troughs, relating to naming things in the data, in the distinctions that are made there. Okay. When you look down a microscope for the first time, if you're not a scientist, you look down and your experience, well, it's not very much when you're looking at a cell. The logos, the textbook, explains, gives names and everything, tells you what things to look out for. And so everything's not exactly the same in the diagrammatic representation, but if you've got a trained eye, you start to be able to see. In the same way as Aunt Agatha's chickens, you start making distinctions, your world changes. You make distinctions and your experience changes. You see all the different chickens and know them by their behavior or whatever. You see the parts of the cell which the untrained eye can't see. This is this notion of constructing your reality in your experience using the forms, because that's all you have according to Plato. So to summarize, the object of science is forms as expressed in your experience. Experience must have external causation, but this is entirely unknown in itself. It is only known as it affects your experience. Okay? So you don't invent this fantasy that you know something that you don't know, right? Never do that. Parmenides is right in that sense. Experience must have external causation, but you don't know it in itself. You only know how it's affected your experience. Through formal analysis, we make sense of experience. Formal analysis, dialectic method, just thinking, oh, that doesn't make sense. Is that an illusion or is that real? You know, how do these things all fit together? You do it all the time. The baby does it all the time. Children do it all the time. Makes sense. Okay, so then to summarize, you have the discourse of science. You have the discourse, you can discuss things, and names connect them to sensible things, the things in your experience, what you've distinguished, and you build that and you can change it. But there is this relationship, this true-false relationship between the names and sensible things. Sensible things in correspondence to their formal structure. So it can be more orderly or less orderly. It can be true and false. You can give a true address or a false address, right? But that's the relationship. Oh, okay.
Just go back to that. Oh, sorry, you went away from it too quick.
What did you want to have a look at? Effie?
Oh, I just wanted to. It's okay. I'll go through it later. It's fine.
Yeah, we'll just bring up what you're interested to talk about.
I'll do that later.
Okay,
Keep going.
all right. Okay.
Can I ask a silly question? In line of all that, is it that therefore, like if everything's, if all, you know, the experience, then it's impossible for someone to be objective because everything we know is affected by our subjective experience. So when we say, when you're told to be objective, that's really an impossibility.
Yeah, in an absolute sense, absolutely. So that's right. You wouldn't say that here. And this is kind of disconcerting, isn't it? Because we kind of say that we construct together our reality, you know, through language and you know, being, you know, through society, we construct our reality together, but we can't pin it down in this absolute way. We can't say, yep, it's objective and it's absolutely there outside, out of control, right? That's that makes us nervous, that makes us anxious. But then when we do our physics and we do our inquiry, whatever inquiry we do, we realize that that's exactly the case. There's nothing absolute in that sense.
Not even in the elementary forms, like the general?
Yes, in the forms there are, yes. But in the particularity of things, there's not.
Right. So,
Yeah.
okay. So that's starting to make a little bit of sense. It's starting to fall into place a little bit for me.
Yeah.
So are you suggesting that we work more towards the incorrectly work within the particular realm without having studied in the general realm? So we look at it through experience rather than looking at it through the general realm and moving downwards to the particular realm. Is that what you're suggesting?
Okay, what to do? Well, the practice is, yeah.
I suppose I'm not willing to accept straight away that we can't be objective. Forgive me, but I'm going to sort of, like, I have to look at that a little bit more.
Objective in what sense? Give me an example of objective.
Well, I guess looking at the world without being completely tainted by our experience.
Okay, I mean, so what in the world is tell me something in your world, my world, in our world, that is beyond your experience.
What's that? Beauty? Like beauty is beauty. It's something is beautiful. It's innately known. It's not through experience that we recognize that.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm saying that Plato would say that you experience the form of beauty in an immediate way.
Yes, but the beauty exists without your experience, and your experience of it is. It's not subjective though, right? It's objective.
Okay. It's objective in that sense. Yeah. Okay. So the forms are objective in that sense. Yeah. The forms. Yeah. The number 2, the circle, you could say it's an object in that sense, but most people mean by object as in particular objects, right? So they think about the circle drawn on your page, or the material atom, or the wood in your chair, or something. That is an object. Right, but if the object is the ideal circle, or the number 2, or the form of beauty, then that is you have an immediate experience of that. And Plato would say, yeah, well, yeah, that's what it's all about. That's right.
Mm.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, look, I haven't, I think I might just do 10 minutes taking through some of the reading, because there's a couple of interesting things there, and I feel like I've neglected it, and people are probably wanting some of that. So I might just do a little bit of that now, because we didn't go through the week 2 reading. So we went into the definition of the sophist straight off, and you said, well, the sophists are an art too, just like angling. But the sophist isn't wise, as the name implies. More like an angler, in that he's a hunter, right? And he's a land hunter. But land hunters are many forms. Lovers are hunters, but they hunt their prey by giving their prey presents. Sophists are hunters, but they take money from their prey. And so to the first definition. But the sophist is many-sided. So let's have a look at it in another way. Sophism is an acquisitive art. And here we get into an interesting thing where he has this excursion into the arts of separation. Plato here and elsewhere talks about these trades that involve combining and separating. Not surprisingly, because these arts relate to his collection, bringing everything together that is like, and division, dividing things up that are unlike. And so these arts of collection and separation are analogous. So this is straining, filtering, purifying. All these arts of division and discrimination, analogous to his dialectic, what he's showing us he's doing in this dialogue. Now, this discussion takes us to the distinction between different types of purification of inanimate things, of living bodies by exercising or medicine, and finally, the purification of the soul. This purification of the soul is divided into removal of the disease of wickedness and removal of the deformity of ignorance. The greatest form of ignorance is to think one knows what one does not know. The stranger says, all the mistakes of the mind are caused by this. This is at 229C. It's quite a big call. All the mistakes of the mind are caused by this. And we'll remember the apology, won't we? Solving the riddle of Delphi. Socrates is ignorant, but at least he knows that. He doesn't think he knows what he doesn't know. So we get rid of this deformity by education. How best to do this purification, this education? By Socratic questioning, by dialectic. It says that on page 230b. Okay, and then he says, and then there's an important section after that where he says that skepticism comes first. It's this purification is all about skepticism. So I'll read a little passage there. For just as physicians who care for the body believe that the body cannot get benefit from any food offered to it until all obstructions are removed, so, my boy, those who purify the soul believe that the soul can receive no benefit from any teaching offered to it until someone by cross-questioning reduces him who is cross-questioned to an attitude of modesty by removing the opinions that obstruct the teaching, and thus purging him and making him think that he knows only what he knows and no more. This is 230 D and E. Theaetetus says, that is surely the best and most reasonable state of mind. Stranger says, for all these reasons, Theaetetus, we must assert that cross-questioning is the greatest and most effective of all purifications, and that he who is not cross-questioned, even though he may be the great king, has not been purified of the greatest taint. And if therefore uneducated and deformed, and is therefore uneducated and deformed in those things in which he who is to be truly happy ought to be most pure and beautiful. So remember, he's saying this about the sophist, the cross-questioning of empty deceit, an athlete in the contest of words, the art of disputation, untranslated in some translation, anti-logic, a purifying of soul's conceit. This is the sophist. And this gets us back to the importance of skepticism. All the leaders in all the dialogues are skeptics. Socrates, The stranger we're reading now, Parmenides, they're all skeptics. It's so important. So the sophists have this practice, and it is a good practice in this negative way. The disputer disputes for disputer's sake, but Plato celebrates their technique for its destructive power. Plato respects and listens to the skeptics, follows Parmenides, follows other Eleatics. Plato uses their technique. Skepticism clears misconceptions so that you can bring in knowledge. Okay, so anyway, things are not going well in this definition of the sophist. With many definitions, 6 in all, this suggests that we still have not found the common principle or feature of the sophist's art. And so we try again. This common feature must surely have something to do with the sophist being a disputer, an anti-logic, and a teacher of disputation. But what do they dispute about? Well, divine things, yeah. And things of the senses, definitely. Social and political matters, yep. Is there anything? Is there any type of knowledge that the sophists are not experts in? No. But they can't be experts in all fields. That's impossible. No one can. So they must be fakers. They must pretend to know what they don't know. They must say things that they don't know and then fool the young into thinking that they do know. So they're pretenders. They pretend to know all things. Pretending to know all things is like pretending to make all things, which is what is done in the art of imitation. Representational painting is an art of imitation, and it can fool small children into thinking that it is real, what they represent. So too in sophistry. The art of pretending to know what is real can fool naive students who don't know very much about what is true. The sophist is a sort of magician, an illusionist, which is a productive art. He produces imitations that fool the young. But we've got a problem here. We're saying that the sophist is saying that falsehood really exists. This seems to involve the contradiction prohibited by Parmenides, not to think or say that not being is. And so we come at the end of last week's reading to that famous fragment from Parmenides, which my translation has. Never let this thought prevail that non-being is, but keep your mind from this way of investigation. And so now we move in to this forbidden territory of Parmenides, this investigation of the being of non-being. And I think I'm going to have to leave it there.
Can I just...
Bernie?
Yep.
I'm close to one point that I was struck by this, the description of the sophist. There's a weird parallel, an uncanny kind of reference to the figure of the demiurge and the Timaeus. I don't know if you've done the Timaeus in the past with this class, or but the demiurge makes images that are part of the world of becoming, and the sophist is here making images that represent all things. So there's this weird parallel between God, who made the universe, and the sophist, just like, you know, creating these false illusions. So it's a weird connection, and I think that the demiurge makes things by reference to the forms, but the sophist makes things by reference to make-believe. So I was struck when I first read this the Sophist. I thought, that's so weird. It's just like Demiurge and the Timaeus, you know. So anyway.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. And it relates to the Gnostic interpretation as well, the Gnosticism. And we come back to creation right at the end, which is really interesting. And the first place we find creation from nothing, as in creation ex nihilo in the English. Yeah. Anyone else?
I wasn't comfortable with the jump he made with the Sophists knowing everything. There are times in history where learned people were actually very skilled in a lot of different things. So you would get a priest and a doctor and a teacher and an artist being in the one person, and hopefully working at a higher level rather than a mundane level. The opposite of that is like, you know, having, you know, like somebody, like a mechanic focusing on wheels and somebody else focusing on the oil, and no one really knowing how to drive the car or make the car. So there's two extremes there. I wasn't comfortable with the jump he made. And in regard to the 6 definitions of the Sophist, something kept coming up to me, like maybe Sophists we use as a word like teacher, like we have a mathematics teacher or an arts teacher or an English teacher, right? So there are lots of different forms of teachers, and maybe there were different forms of Sophists. So you could find different definitions for them, and maybe you could have even given them a different name. I was just, those two things are questions that remain in my mind.
Thanks. Yeah. So you think he's being a bit harsh? Yeah. Anyone else? So we didn't get on to today's reading, unfortunately, but I hope maybe you want to go back and see it, read it again. It's not too long. I'm just hoping that the stuff we did today will help you with this being and not being, and the absolute non-being idea and relative non-being. And so as we move into this, hopefully you will, it will help you, because it does sometimes feel a bit alien. So the reading, the following reading continues with this, where with this diving down into it, into this prohibited area, this area that the father Parmenides said not to investigate. And they move into the battle of the gods and the giants. That's the next section. So considering these two schools that are diametrically opposed, the idealists, the extreme idealists, and the materialists. So interesting to see his presentation of materialism that we don't know much about other than through Plato, and these extreme idealists who are more on Plato's side. So that's the following week's reading. And next week, I will summarize them both. So I'm sorry I didn't summarize this week's reading, but at least we caught up a little bit. So is there any final questions before I stop the recording, or yeah.
I just found today's reading, today's explanations really helpful, because I sometimes find that I get, I'm still trying to come to terms. I'm still trying to come to terms with the forms in some ways. And so I think the table that you also showed, going from right to left, was helpful to me to kind of break down and understand how we get from A to B to C to D, and how through the readings he actually kind of weaves through sometimes. I can't say that I've actually grasped it, but I'm starting to see the pattern. Like I'm starting to see like a wave or yeah, I'm starting to see that. So that was helpful. Thank you.
Okay, good. And sorry, Jackie, we never got to the little exercise, but thanks for volunteering to do that.
No worries at all.
Yeah, maybe we could do it next week. I think we might have more time. I think, you know, though I really felt like after the post-class discussion last week, felt like I needed to give you guys something to hang on to, something that can be a bit closer to our experience today. So I hope that helped, and I hope that thinking about these things, whenever I say, you know, this is something worth meditating on, really, you're not going to progress if you don't reflect on this stuff and do your own work, if you like, on this stuff. You know, it's only so far you can get just coming to these classes, like with anything, I suppose. So just a plug there for doing your own work and doing the reading. The readings aren't that long for the next few weeks, so it's hard work, but they're not so long, so that's good. All right, well, I'm going to close it off now, but do please stay around those people who can, because we did have a lovely discussion last week, and people who had questions that they couldn't fit in, yeah, I think we had a good discussion. So if you want to, hang around. Otherwise, see you next week for the war of the giants and the gods next week. So that should be fun. All right, see you then.